Hello everyone and welcome back to the Card Combo Show, episode 37, me, Choco Billy. Make sure to like and subscribe if you do enjoy the videos and like the channel. This week we are going to be looking at Kefka from Opus 1, Charlotte from Opus 13, Valefor from Opus 1, Illusionist from Opus 6, and Golbez from Opus 1. Let's get to it. Okay, so firstly, Kefka is a 4-cost backup with a dull, choose one forward you control. It gains plus 5,000 power until the end of the turn. At the end of the turn, break it. So he gives a pretty substantial buff even today, and then he's also a reliable way to be able to break one of your own forwards as well. So, first and foremost, Sabin. Sabin represents more of a kind of an effect here, which is to make one of your forwards you control not be able to be broken. So at the end of the turn, when Kefka tries to break it, it won't break. Obviously, you can attack with Sabin, or you can just play him onto the field. You can also play things like Paravir, or there are some cards like Golbez, where they just, as standard, have a cannot be broken effect on them. But yeah, basically, I mean that Kefka will give the plus 5k buff with no downside. Calbrainer, a fairly old combo now, but I'll go over it anyway. So Calbrainer can be made a 7k forward with the text, when Calbrainer is put from the field into the break zone, return Calbrainer to the field dull. So it means that she can be used as a pretty substantial attacker or blocker, and even when she dies within the turn to Kefka's ability, she will return dull. Probably better for blocking, because that way she will then come back at the end of your opponent's turn to then stand back up again. Rubicante. When Rubicante is split from the field into the break zone, choose one forward your opponent controls. Deal it damage equal to Rubicante's power, and then damage 3, Rubicante gains plus 3,000 power. So obviously at damage 3 he's an 8k. Using Kefka, that means he can become a pretty huge 13k forward. And you know, you don't even have to do anything with Rubicante. You could just, in your main phase 2, use Kefka on Rubicante, go to end your turn, Rubicante gets put into the break zone, and you can deal 13k damage to something. Ovelia. So Ovelia's S ability is awesome, not just for the fact that she has its kind of built-in flicker effect, and obviously Kefka can use that with the break ability, but it's also the fact that you can use Ovelia to make a forward haste, or have haste, and then you can use Kefka to give it plus 5k power, so even if it's a relatively small forward, you can make it pretty hard to deal with. And then at the end of the turn, it will break, get put into the break zone, Ovelia will then flicker it back onto the field, and so if it's got a entry ability, that will re-trigger as well. Black Waltz 3, a horrible little ice card with some great leave the field effects. So obviously you can use Kefka to make him an 8k forward, which again is fairly substantial, good for blocking, but even still, at the end of the turn, Black Waltz 3 will break, and then you can choose one or select one of the 3 following actions. Your opponent discards a card from their hand, choose one dull forward, deal it 7k damage, or choose one ice, summon in your break zone, add it to your hand. So it may even be a case of the fact that you don't necessarily care about blocking with Black Waltz or whatever, you're just using Black Waltz to be able to get an ice summon from your break zone to your hand, or just make your opponent discard that one card you know they have. Spiritus. So this is kind of like a souped up version of Pamphlet, but better for you. So when a dark forward other than Spiritus you control is put from the field into the break zone, choose up to one forward, remove it from the game. This effect will only trigger once per turn. So obviously you can, with Spiritus and Kefka on the field, use Kefka to choose another dark forward. It gets put from the field into the break zone. Spiritus will then allow you to choose one of your opponent's forwards and remove it. Now, if you combine this with the likes of Golbez, it means that when Golbez is put from the field into the break zone, your opponent randomly discards one card from his or her hand, choose one monster in your break zone, add it to your hand, or choose one forward, it loses 5,000 power until the end of the turn. So you can make Golbez again, 13k forward, and then either block or attack with him. And then at the end of the turn, Golbez is put into the break zone, make your opponent discard a card, and then using Spiritus, you then get to remove one of your opponent's forwards. That's quite a lot to handle in one turn. You can combo this with Maya as well. She has the text, when a light or dark character either player controls is put from the field into the break zone, choose a character other than light or dark in your break zone, add it to your hand. So obviously using Maya, Golbez, Spiritus and Kefka, you get to remove one of your opponent's forwards, you get to get a card back with Maya, and you get to make your opponent discard a card using Golbez. It doesn't have to be discard a card, you could also do minus 5k to a small forward and finish it off. But yeah, that's, again, a lot for just dulling Kefka with Spiritus, Maya, and Golbez on the field. Obviously, you don't have to use Spiritus, you can also use Materia as well. Materia is a lot less offensive, so instead it's when a light forward other than Materia you control is put from the field into the break zone, draw one card. This effect will only trigger once per turn, but again, with Maya it still works. You would be getting a card back to hand, and then you'd also be drawing a card as well, which is some great consistency. Now, if you use this on the likes of the Oracle of Light, you can use Kefka to make her 10k forward, so you could attack with her, hopefully deal a point damage, or break one of your opponent's forwards. And then, when the Oracle Light is put from the field into the break zone, you may remove Oracle Light from the game. When you do so, choose one Job Scion of the 7th Dawn in your break zone, play it onto the field dull. This is good because it doesn't have to be a Scions deck, it could just be, there's a few generically good Scions out there, the likes of Ishtola, Multicolor Fancred or Minfilia. They're all great and can all be played in the field using Oracle of Light. And again, with Materia, you get to draw a card, and if you also have Mara in the field, you also get to get a card back from your break zone. Okay, Charlotte, so a horrible little ice card who is gonna get played for forever because it's just a really good ability. So she's a 2 CP 5k forward with the text summons and abilities. Your opponent must choose Charlotte if possible, and at damage 3, Charlotte gains plus 2000 power, and the damage dealt to Charlotte is reduced by 2000 instead. So not only does she gain power, but she also gains damage reduction as well. So you combine her with the likes of Celestia, which is obviously quite heavily played. It means that Charlotte has to be targeted, but also when an ice character you control is chosen by your opponent's summons and abilities, choose up to one character, dull it and freeze it. Just horrible. Cecil, so obviously Charlotte damage 3 has her own ability to be able to negate damage. Using Cecil's pay 0 ability means you can reduce 4k damage to Charlotte as well. Obviously you will deal 4k to Cecil, but Charlotte has to be targeted, so if your opponent did want to finish off Cecil, they'd have to either use a board wipe effect or get rid of Charlotte first. Lady, choose one job knight forward, activate it. And obviously Charlotte is a knight, which she is the only second knight in ice, the first being Laswell. There are technically 3 copies of them now. I say technically, there just are. Sorry. But yeah, basically this could be used if maybe you've got a mirror match against ice where your opponent has to choose Charlotte because she is dull and they want to class something like, I don't know, 5 CP Hades, which would break and make your opponent discard. You could then use Clady to stand Charlotte back up, but also just Clady is great because people always seem to forget about her and be able to reactivate Charlotte, who has a damage mitigation ability on her as well. And again, this combined with Cecil means that she has to be targeted with everything, but she also gets more damage mitigation. Beatrix, again, she's a knight, so having Charlotte, kind of worm her way into a knight deck would be absolutely horrible because your opponent obviously has to target Charlotte, and they're probably going to be wanting to get rid of the likes of Beatrix or 5-cost Fire Garland, but ultimately you could play something like 4 CP Phoenix to be able to cheat Charlotte onto the field, at which point, using Beatrix, all your forwards would gain plus 2000 power, and then your opponent have to get rid of Charlotte, and knights are notoriously hard to get rid of. The Emperor, so obviously your opponent has to target Charlotte, but making it so that they can use less abilities to be able to target her as well is a great way. And obviously Charlotte is used quite a lot with Sid Randall. Now if you combine this with the Emperor and Summoner as well, it means that if your opponent has any forwards that enter the field, their auto abilities will not trigger. The Emperor stops all action abilities from happening, and Summoner can cancel any summon if you pay 1 ice. So that's quite a lot of restrictions on your opponent, unless they have quite like a board wipe effect from a backup or something like that. They are heavily restricted in what they can do. Now obviously Sid Randall and Charlotte are, normally pretty small, and the Emperor, whilst he doesn't have a bad power, you probably don't want him to die because he has a really good effect. So at that point these guys kind of become monsters more than forwards, but you will be in ice, so it means that you probably have the means of dunning out your opponent's forwards and can just go swinging through with these little guys. Okay, Illusionist, a never played backup. So Dull, put Illusionist into the break zone, choose one forward, it must attack this turn if possible. It sounds like an interesting ability, but it very rarely gets played. I think it's just a case of there's always something better to play, and the combos for it are very niche. But anyway, so obviously playing Illusionist against something like Ninja means that your opponent's forward has to attack, and you're going to use this on a very problematic forward, so something that they aren't going to attack. If you play Ninja, they're not going to attack with that forward anymore because then they know it's immediately going to die, but using Illusionist means that forces it to attack, so it could be something like, I mean, there's loads of different cards it could be, there's so many problematic forwards out there, but let's go with something, say, like Gudon. He can attack twice per turn, he's got Brave, just a horrible forward, so forcing it to attack means that you can then block with Ninja, and then pay 2 lightning, Ninja goes into the break zone, so does Gudon. Amaterasu, so again a bit of a weird play, but you can use Illusionist to force a forward that has an auto ability when it attack, at which point you can then use Amaterasu to cancel that auto ability and then hopefully kill it with the 8k damage. Cloud, when a category 7 forward you control blocks, it gains plus 1000 power until the end of the turn. It's even better if you combo this with a 7 forward that has first strike as well. But yeah, obviously you use Illusionist to make the board attack, you then block with any 7 forward with Cloud on the field, it gains plus 1000 power whilst blocking, and again if first strike it should survive as well. Malboro, so when Malboro blocks or is blocked, all the forwards your opponent controls lose 2000 power until the end of the turn. So this may be quite useful to combo into a board-wide effect, so you force one of your opponent's forwards to block, maybe a problematic one, you block Malboro, hopefully Malboro will kill it. But then you get a -2 to all your opponent's forwards, at which point you could then use some more fire cards to deal some more board damage or just chip damage to be able to finish all those things off. Shantoto, now this is a pretty good combo. So Shantoto, you can play with quite a few monsters, and it means that Shantoto's damage will get flickered around the board without any fear of hitting your own forwards, because they're monsters and not forwards yet. So you force your opponent's even 9k forward to attack, you block with Shantoto, that 9k gets flickered around the board, hopefully removes all the other forwards your opponent controls, at which point you can then make your monsters forwards and then attack with those guys. Bergen. So when Bergen blocks or is blocked, deal 7000 damage to the forwards that block or is blocked by Bergen, and obviously you can pay 1 fire and colourless to choose a forward and deal 1000 damage as well, to kind of top up his damage as well. Now this is good for a lot of forwards where they can't be they have to be broken through damage, so making it so that they attack Bergen. When Bergen blocks is blocked, deal 7000 damage to that forward that is blocking Bergen. What's good about this is that it's not targeting the forward. So let's say you've got something like 3 CP Water Ash, where if you target her, she gains plus 2000 power. If she were to attack Bergen, also I just realised the nice 12 theme there, but if she were to attack and you block with Bergen, Bergen would then deal 7k damage to her. Actually, you would have targeted her with Illusionist, but let's pretend you didn't target her with Illusionist. Obviously, deal 7k to her, at which point she would then die. Obviously, you need to be careful if you do target her with then the additional fire damage, she would then pump up her power as well. But yeah, it's just a nice way to be able to deal 7k to something without having to target it, and 7k damage isn't that bad either. Zeed. When Zeed is dealt damage by a character, that character's controller discards 1 card from his or her hand, and obviously you can pay 1 ice to be able to top up his power as well. Basically, which means that if your opponent's got a slightly smaller forward, you force it to attack, block with Zeed, Zeed will kill it, and then your opponent also has to discard as well. Cool, Valefor. So a really heavily played card when it first came out, but as time has gone on, it doesn't get played much anymore, mostly due to the fact that returning a forward back to your opponent's hand isn't that great of an ability anymore. It's good for like maybe one final push to be able to get past, but it is still putting cards back into your opponent's hand, which then gives them the CP to be able to play more summons from the hand, which they otherwise couldn't have. But I think it still has a place today because it is a board-wide effect, and ultimately it does get forwards off the field. So if your opponent's got something like Phil Thanos or Charlotte there, playing Valefor means that they are just put back and your opponent does have to pay more to get them back there. Now you can combine this with the likes of Scale Toad, which means that say at the end of your opponent's turn, they have 5 cards in hand, you've got Scale Toad, so they're already happy with the fact they're going to have to discard 1 card, that would put them to 4. They go to try and end their turn, you then play Valefor, and say they've got a couple of forwards on their field. They then come back to their hand. Now they have to deal with the fact that they now have 7 cards at the end of their turn. They will have to discard 1 through Scale Toad, but now they have to discard down 2 as well to be able to get down to hand size, at which point they are forced to either play cards back onto the field, at which point you've made them effectively discard, because if your opponent plays those 2 forwards back onto the field out of their hand, you've effectively made them discard those cards out of hand. Scale Toad was going to do that anyway, but that was only 1 card. This way you've made them discard more. But not only that, it's a case of the fact that it's a nice board reset. You do need to be careful if the forwards, when they come back down, Are they going to actually benefit your opponent a lot more? Like, say, if they are just drawing them more cards, which you could also argue is kind of mill in certain terms, but you just need to be careful of it. Doga, so you can actually combo this with Scaletoad as well, so you put loads of cards back into your opponent's hand, they need to try and get rid of them. The Scaletoad there means that they also go down to one more as well. Using Doga means that you're breaking one of their backups, at which point they can't use that backup to then replay the forwards in their hand. So if they've got 7 cards at hand at the end of their turn and you've broken one with Doga, broken a backup, sorry, with Doga, they're then more restricted on how they can play the forwards back onto the field. Viking leaves the field, draw a card, so you can play Layla Viking, get a card, play Valefor, get a card, play Viking, Layla, get a card. You know, it's not exactly a complicated combo, but it just more represents that there's some good leave the field abilities which can benefit you, and sometimes you need to do these sorts of things to be able to get more cards to hand. But yeah. Similar sort of thing here as well. So Thief, when he enters the field, he makes your opponent mill a card, and then the other Thief makes your opponent mill a card when he leaves the field. So you can have these two on the field, you play Valefor, your opponent mills a card, play one back onto the field, they mill a card again. It's one of the more reliable ways to be able to get your opponent to mill. Zidane. So again, your opponent may have something like Felthanos on the field, and you've got, say, Zidane on your field as well. You could play Valefor, at which point everything returns to people's hands. You can then play Zidane, and you know there's a Felthanos in there, so you can then use that to get that card gone. Aranea. So at damage 3, when an Aranea enters the field, choose one lightning forward, of course 2 or less in your break zone, play onto the field, but also at damage 6, Aranea gains the forwards you control gain haste. So this is good for like one kind of final push. Say you're at damage 6, you put everyone's forwards back into their hands, you play Aranea, hopefully you get a lightning forward from your break zone onto the field as well. You could then play 1 or 2 more forwards. All of them have gained haste through Aranea's damage 6 ability, and you can just go swinging. Now, as I mentioned earlier, when you put more cards back into your opponent's hand, it means that they could probably cast more summons from hand or use more abilities. But, you know, if you can kind of gauge what your opponent's going to do from the deck they're playing. Lock. So the cost required to cast Lock is reduced to 2 for each card you have cast this turn. So you could have Lock already on your field. You cast Valefor, that's 1 card cast, and you put Lock back into your hand. You could then play something like the 2 CP Wind Legend Ash, which, you know, the more cards you cast, she gets you a card to hand as well. You play her, and then at that point Lock's cost will then be reduced by 4. You could maybe cast another small summon or something like that, and then you could play Lock for 4 CP if you need to, or 2 CP if you can get him that low. Now obviously you have already played 5 for Valefor, which is quite a lot, and it doesn't really count towards the cost reduction of Lock, because even if you do get him down to 2, if you just played Valefor and then Lock for 2, that is a lot of CP, and to get Lock to 2 you will have played at least 2 other things on top of Valefor to get him to 2. So again, it's a lot of CP spent, but Wind is pretty good at reactivation, so I'm sure there's some ways to be able to, you know, make it happen. And ultimately, you've put all your opponent's forwards back to their hand, which means that they're going to want to recast those, but putting Lock back into your hand means you can play Lock again and freeze your opponent's backups, at which point they will have more cards to start their turn with, but they will have fewer backups to be able to use, so they have to use more cards from hand to be able to replay those forwards. Buckaboo. Yeah, you put your opponent's forwards back into their hand, they want to replay them, but Buckaboo's there, so they have to deal with the fact that they are going to lose 2 cards when they play a forward, or, you know, it's not just forward, it's when a character, so if they want to play a backup as well, you know, they've still got to discard 2 cards. Now again, it's kind of weird because you are giving them more cards to hand, so they got more cards to discard, but still, if you, let's say your opponent has 3 backups in the hand that they don't care about, that they were willing to discard anyway, but now they've also got the 2 forwards you put in hand, and they actually want to use maybe an ability or something like that, they would have to play one of those forwards either using their backups and the cards they otherwise would have used for something else, at which point they then have to discard as well. So they can use those backups that they didn't care about as discard fodder, but that is still eating away at their resources they would use to do other things. Cool, last but not least, Golbez. I'm sure a lot of you are very familiar with this card. When he's put from the field into the break zone, you may search up to 4 forwards of cost 2, each of a different element, and play them onto the field that their auto abilities will not trigger. So first we'll focus more on the good ways to be able to get rid of him. Obviously there's Deleter, you play Deleter, you can then put Golbez into the break zone. You can cast Fanfrit, your opponent puts a card into the break zone and you put Golbez into the break zone, or Magic Pop. I went over this last week. You use Magic Pot to put this Golbez into the break zone to go find Opus 13 Golbez to play on the field to gain 9 forwards and a board wipe with Cagnazzo. If you haven't watched that video, go watch that video. But yeah, all great ways and reliable ways to be able to break your Golbez. There's plenty more out there. And in true Golbez fashion, I will be talking about 4 forwards of different elements at once. So Yuffie, Elena, Tifa, and Cloud. Obviously, there's a 7 theme going on here. Yuffie, if you control 3 or more 7 forwards, or characters even, Yuffie gains plus 2,000 power and haste. So just these forwards alone would mean that she gains that. And also when she attacks, she'll deal 1,000 to your opponent's board. Now, similarly, Elena, she has haste. If you control a card named Rufus, she gains plus 2,000 power. But Elena can only attack if you control 4 or more forwards, or if you control a job member of the Turks forward other than Elena. It can sound a bit confusing because it makes it sound like you have to control 4 forwards other than Elena, or if you control a job member of the Turks forward other than Elena. What that actually means is that it's just member of the Turks. If you control 4 or more forwards, including Elena, that's fine. So by using Golbez to bring in Elena and 3 others, she still is able to actually attack. Then you got Tifa, just because she's 7 forward and fits the theme, and she is ultimately haste. And then Cloud, obviously you can use his dull ability the turn after to be able to put something like Tifa or Yuffie into the break zone to then bring out a 3 CP. Warrior of Light, Charlotte, Beatrix, and Kunshira. So obviously when Warrior of Light enters the field, he won't get his ability to give 2,000 power to all your opponent's forwards, but if you have 4 more forwards, he does gain haste. Now Charlotte and Beatrix, as I mentioned earlier, Charlotte is a knight, so when Charlotte enters with Beatrix, Beatrix will see Charlotte entering, and that will give a plus 2,000 power buff to all your forwards, because even though they're entering simultaneously, Beatrix sees Charlotte entering, at which point it triggers. And obviously Charlotte is a great lightning rod for all your other forwards as well, so maybe your opponent wants to get rid of something else, they have to target Charlotte before they can get rid of anything else. And then Kunshira, obviously it gains haste, and if you control 4 more backups, Kunshira loses 3,000 power, so you want to make sure that that is not a factor, but if it is, then at least Beatrix and Charlotte are giving her a buffer. Just as a note, obviously this isn't, I'm not saying like these are the de facto 4 cards you should be playing together, these are just 4 that I think work well together. Also, it's nice to point out that Kunshira is obviously a multicolour card. Multicolour doesn't matter too much so long as you're not picking 2 cards that contain any of the same 4 elements, which you'll see in a combo after this one. So Shadow Lord, obviously when he enters the field, your opponent would get to play a 2 CP backup onto the field, but auto abilities don't trigger, so that doesn't matter, and he is also huge. At damage 5, both Onion Knights gain plus 4,000 power, and then Fire gains haste, Ice gains brave, so again, huge forwards. And then Kain, rather fittingly for Final Fantasy IV, he gains haste, and when Kain enters the field, from your hand, place 1 brainwashing counter on Kain, which won't trigger, so he is literally just a 2 CP, 9k forward with haste. And then, yeah, here we go. So what I was talking about with the multicolours. So you've got a water, a fire, an ice wind, and an earth lightning forward. So when Golbez states each of a different element, they are still of a different element because there's absolutely no crossover. So you can still do something like this, you just need to be careful when you do it. But yeah, Nicole, when a multi-element, or the multi-element forwards you control gain plus 1,000 power, so that's good for Riku and Wall. But then when a multi-element forward enters field, draw 1 card. So like with Charlotte and Beatrix, Nicole will see them simultaneously and she will draw you a card, which is good. Then Selphie, for each forward other than the 4 you control, Selphie gains plus 2,000 power. So for the 3 other forwards, she will actually become an 11k forward, which is pretty substantial. But then also when a multi-element forward enters your field, you may pay 1 fire. When you do so, until the end of the turn, it gains plus 2,000 power and haste. Now, obviously, Golbez says that auto abilities will not trigger. What he actually refers to is entry abilities. So that, like with Riku, when she says, when Riku enters the field, select one of the 2 following actions, that will not trigger. But when a card's auto ability is triggered by another card entering the field, that will trigger. So Selphie will work, Nicole will work. So yeah, but either way, you can pay 1 fire to give Riku plus 2,000 power and haste. You can also do the same for Wall as well. And with Nicole, it means that both Riku and Wall will have gained plus 3,000 power and haste, which makes Wall a 10k forward. The only reason I picked Riku here is just because she was of the 2 elements and a 2 CP forward that wasn't shared by any of the others. But yeah, Wall. he will become a 10k forward with haste, which is pretty substantial. But also when Wall deals damage to your opponent, choose one category mode of his character in your break zone, add it to your hand. So that's also pretty cool as well. And last but not least, Luso. Obviously I couldn't talk about Golbez without talking about Luso. So for each forward other than Luso you control, Luso gains 1,000 power. If there are 3 or more different elements amongst forwards you control, Luso gains First Strike and Brave. And then when Luso attacks, if there are 5 or more different elements among the forwards you control, Luso deals your opponent 1 point of damage. So if Luso enters with 2 other multi-element forwards, so let's say you had Wall and then, I don't know, Leon, the Fire Ice Leon, enter with Luso, and the 4th doesn't matter, let's go with Light Onion Knight. Luso would actually gain his deal a point of damage ability just from the multicolour forwards because they are multi-element, and so that means they fulfill at least 4 of the elements that Luso is looking for, and then Luso himself fills 1, and then you've also got the Onion Knight as well. And that's a wrap. Thank you so much for watching, guys. It really means a lot to me. Again, if you haven't subscribed, please do hit that subscribe button and like the video. The more likes I get in the videos, the more I can kind of gauge the reception of it, and there will be more, not just episodes of this, but more shows coming soon as well. So there are the likes of Behind the Card, where I kind of explore the backgrounds of cards and the events that they take place and the characters, and also a show about jobs and kind of archetypes, that sort of thing. Anyway, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.